Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fair Scare, where I tell you stories that may or may not be true. So let's go. My name is Timothy. I moved to North Carolina with my grandfather recently because of the mysterious passing of my parents. My grandfather would always say, when I asked him, some things are better left not known, or let sleeping dogs lie. And because I was a teenager, I didn't really pay attention to anything that he said regardless. I was kind of resenting my mother, thinking how dare she leave me alone in this world with an old man such as my grandfather. I thought that old coot didn't know anything, but he did. It was on a Tuesday morning in September where my grandfather had gotten a letter from one of his war buddies. I couldn't really decipher the letter afterwards because my grandfather had mostly burned it in the fire, but all it said was, "He's coming." I didn't know what he was, but I would be able to figure out later that he had something to do with the passing of my parents. Unbeknownst to my grandfather, I went snooping around in his stuff after he had left. My grandfather was from Vietnam. Well, not from there, but he was in a war there. And when he came home, he was very gaunt and gray. All he could do was just stare out the window. None of my family knew why. I was just a child, so he thought that he could trust in me, and no one would believe me anyway. He told me this creature called the hush. If you're too loud, it will attack you. My grandfather said in a very hushed tone that the problem is that your parents, I can't tell you this because they don't want me to, but let's just say they know way more than they should. All these thoughts going through my mind when I look at my grandfather's belongings, and I see our old family house. It was a picture, but it was crossed out like there was something that someone was trying to forget. It was crossed out in the attic. I thought it to be pretty strange because I didn't remember there even being an attic, and normally there's a door. I'd been through that house backwards and forwards. I couldn't find it. But thanks to my grandfather just leaving this shit out, I found a schematic and I decided to go there. My grandfather called periodically back at the house. I had a friend who sort of could do a good impression of me, pretend to be me. So I went back to my family home and I found nothing. The schematic, I thought to myself, the schematic was complete and utter garbage. But then I hear some tapping upstairs, almost like footsteps. But that's impossible because the house had gone under foreclosure. So I had no choice but to roam up there because my curiosity was more than piqued. It had been decimated. So the tapping that I hear gets louder and louder and louder until I see this wall and a hole. I think to myself, did they wallpaper over the door? I look around for the doorknob. I can't find it. But then I realized something. It's not to keep anything out. It's to keep something. It's to keep something in. Because there was a lock. I heard heavy breathing, labored breathing. I couldn't believe what was happening. And I smelled this horrible scent of rotten flesh and tree bark. Followed by the labored breathing, all I heard was I quickly gathered my bearings. I was about to scream. I remembered what my grandfather told me. If I stay quiet, it can't see me. So, I stayed quiet. It looked around in a disgusting, gargled voice. I can smell you. It talked in such low terms and low tones. It scared me. It shook me to my very core. The creature was practically on top of me. It looked directly at me with no eyes, yet somehow it still saw me, and I knew it did. I could feel it staring into my soul, and it said to me, "You're just like your mother, Timothy." I did everything to hold back a scream. I said to it, "How do you know my mother?" And it said, "There you are. I know your mother because..." And before I could do anything, before he could say anything, my grandfather shot it in the gut with a 12-gauge shotgun. My grandfather told me to close my eyes, Timmy. There was a racket and it sounded like a struggle. My grandfather laid there on the ground, gut torn. The creature scurried out the back window. I took out my gun and was about to shoot it. Well, I took the gun on the ground. It's now my gun because my grandfather is no longer with us. So, my grandfather told me one last thing before he succumbed to his injuries. I said to my grandfather, "I don't have time, Grandpa. I have to hunt this thing down for my family." My grandfather said, coughing up blood, gurgling, "That is your family, Timothy. That's your father." I wanted to know more because my father, he was a musician. He loved music. He loved people. How could he do this? And of all things, family meant the most to him. I asked my grandfather more, but he passed. I ran into the woods to make as little sound as possible, not to alert the hush, which is now my father. The wind blew and the trees rattled, and all I could hear was hush.